shook his head. This isn't the reason. Though I hated you because of this in the past, after entering the 13th division, I understood how deep the waters in the Seriidii were. What simply pisses me off is seeing you act like some tragic heroine who sacrificed herself for the family. A vein popped out on his forehead when he heard this. The muffled laugh from the two women present didn't help. Kakaku, Ranjaku, don't tell me you find it funny? Kakaku Shiba, a black-haired young woman with rather enticing curves, covered her mouth as she shook her head. Her green eyes were flashing with amusement, but she didn't wish to further shame her eldest brother. Ranjaku Matsumoto, the vice-captain of the 10th Division on the other hand, was already laughing out loud. Her long blonde hair swayed as her incredibly large breasts heaved. The two women's clothes revealed quite a bit of cleavage. But, even though Kakaku was by no means small, Ranjaku was simply on another level altogether. Ignoring the laughing duo since he was already used to their antics, Kyan looked back at his brother. So answer me, why are you here? Scratching his head, Ishin sighed before continuing. The geezer sent me after we received the report from that trainee. It's already weird enough for a hollow to appear in the first district. But the fact that a new soul could supposedly use Kido after just one look is unheard of. It has already been 3 days since Momo made her report. Kyan couldn't help but frown. What about my captain? Well, you know how bad his health is. He had a problem during the reunion. What? Kyan immediately rose from his position. It was well known that the captain of the 13th Division, Jushiro Yukitake, despite being one of the oldest captains, also had a very fragile health. Oh, don't worry. That double-faced psycho took care of him. Kyan let out a sigh of relief. He knew who his brother was talking about. Retsu Unohana, the captain of the 4th Division and the best healer of the Soul Society. Sitting back, he let out a sigh of relief. I see. If he is in the hands of Captain Unohana, then we have nothing to worry about. Still, why are you always insulting her? Even though I admit that she can be somewhat rough during her treatment, I don't think she is two-faced. Haha, if only you knew. Like Yukitake, Ishin was also one of the oldest captains in the Soul Society. But compared to Unohana, he could only calm himself as a junior. After all, she was nearly as old as the captain commander, making her a woman more than 2,000 years old. But this wasn't all. He knew very well that the captain of the 4th Division hadn't always been the gentle and warm woman she portrayed herself to be. The fact that she was the first Kenpachi, as well as the first captain of the 11th Division, was enough to prove how violent and bloodthirsty she was. What's more, before becoming a founding member of the Godii 13, she was known as one of the most diabolical criminals in the Soul Society. Still, this was something of an unofficial secret, and since he didn't want to receive a visit from that crazy psycho, he decided to change subject. Forget it. Anyway, we in the 2nd Division received the mission. First, we are to monitor him to verify if he really has a level equal or superior to a seated officer. Second, if we determine that it's indeed the case, we have to determine his tendency. If he is clean, we are to make sure that he enters the academy. Someone as talented as him would be interesting to have. What if he is dangerous? Kyan asked. Then we kill him. Sneeze somewhere else in the Rukongai. A silver-haired man who was standing with his torso naked and had many white bandages covering his eyes sneezed a little. Man, is someone talking behind my back? Or perhaps you are just cold because you are standing like an exhibitionist so soon in the morning. An equally silver-haired boy, who could pass for his brother, remarked sarcastically while munching on a slice of watermelon. They were of course Gojo Satoru and Toshiro Hitsugaya. Gojo didn't seem bothered by the sarcasm and simply wiggled his finger. TCH. You don't understand. My body is a true work of art. You should be happy to be in the first seat to appreciate it. Don't you think so, Momo? Heh. Momo, who was also happily munching on her watermelon, was startled at being called on. Then looking back at Gojo's well-defined body, she could simply nod while blushing. It wasn't as if it was the first time she saw a man without his shirt on. After all, most Shinigami were men. It was a rather common sight in the academy. Still, she had to admit that she wasn't used to seeing a man like that too up close. It was even more so since Gojo was extremely shameless and would always tease her one way or another. E/N. I would say pedophilia, but we all know she's basically a loli baba. In the 3 days they passed together, the three of them became rather close and quite friendly. Gojo, having his ego soothed once again, went back to doing his routines. Because of his new body, even though it seemed similar to his previous one, there were many little differences. As such, he needed training to get back the control he had in the past. Well, Momo, finish your snack and come. I am done warming up. Momo buried her head deeper in the watermelon and finished it in one gulp before rushing toward Gojo. Another thing that happened during those 3 days was that Hinamori would always train with Gojo. Even though it has only been 3 short days, her ways of moving, breathing, and situational awareness were at a completely different level from 3 days ago. After all, even though her understanding of Kido surpassed Gojo for now, the fact that he had been fighting against curses for more than 10 years back when he was alive was something that would vanish. By imparting those experiences to Momo, he was changing what was already a genius into a monster. After a few hours of training, Gojo stretched a little before leaving the sweating and heaving Momo. Well, I need to do something. Repeat some level low Bakudo. Shiro, don't let her slack off. K. Toshiro waved his hand disinterestedly while Momo began to execute herself. After leaving the 2 kids who somehow became his students before he understood what was happening, Gojo left the compound and headed somewhere. It took him a few short minutes before he reached a rather remote zone. Once there, he stopped and began to stretch a little. Well, I don't know who you are, but don't you think it's rather impolite to spy on people? Silence was the only answer he received, before a bunch of ninja-like soldiers appeared all around him, effectively surrounding him. But Gojo didn't even spare a glance at them. His eyes, even though covered, were fixated in one direction. From that place, a massive man holding a bag of chips and a short woman wearing the same black clothes with a white haori slowly appeared. I am surprised. To think we would be discovered so fast. The woman looked at him, curiosity clearly evident in her eyes. Initially, she didn't have to take this mission, but she wished to use this occasion to train some new recruits of the secret force. Now though, it seemed that this mission was going to be more entertaining than she thought. Gojo, meanwhile, showed a serious expression for the first time in a while. Even though the 2 in front of him were containing their powers, he was sure of it. Those 2 were strong. A grin formed on his face. Well, things suddenly became way more interesting. Soifan, captain of the 2nd Division of the Godai 13 and commandant of the secret force, was attentively observing the man known as Satoru Gojo, and she had only one thought. I don't like him. Aside from him being relatively handsome and his power being too large for a new soul, what really irked her was his nonchalance. The way he spoke and the hidden arrogance in his words. Everything made her remember one man. That bastard Kasuk. It has already been close to 60 years since he fled from the Siriidii with her mistress. Even after 60 years, just remembering this made her want to scream and rage. Let's focus. She immediately decided to not face this man. She wasn't just a little guard following the princess like in the past. Because of her position, it was necessary for her to not mix feelings and work. This outing was supposed to be a test for the newbies. I can't say that they failed since even the 2 of us were discovered. Should I have them fight against him? She pondered a little. The mission was only supposed to enter the extermination phase if the man was dangerous. Sadly, they weren't able to see enough to determine whether he was a dangerous element or a talent to pull in. What's more, if she handled the situation wrongly, she could push him away from them even if he hadn't wished so initially. If I fail my mission on the first day, the captain commander is going to kill me. Gojo, feeling no hostility coming from the people surrounding him, understood that they were just supposed to observe him. Ah, man, don't tell me I made a mistake. The cliché scene of a guy going in a dark alley and calling out people tailing him before proceeding to beat them like a Chad was always so cool in movies. Why did he fail at the very first step? The situation fell into an awkward lull, neither side quite knowing how to act. One could even feel a slightly cold wind flow into the scene. Scratching his head, Gojo proposed, "Look, how about we act as if nothing happened? You guys go do whatever you were doing, and I am going to act as if I didn't see you. Deal?" Looking at Gojo with a deadpan expression, Soifan once again wondered how someone could have such a punchable face. What she didn't expect was that one of her soldiers couldn't hold himself back and rushed behind the man called Gojo by using a shuanpa. Even though he was incredibly fast for her, he was so slow she could see each of his movements quite clearly. That idiot. She cursed and was about to rush to stop this action. before stopping dead in her tracks as she saw what Gojo was about to do. He smiled leisurely while taking 2 steps to the side and avoiding the hit that, while not fatal, would have surely wounded him. This was followed by a twirl then, 1 full blow to the stomach. In just a few seconds, one of her so-called elites was taken down by some new soul without even being given a chance to counterattack. How did you stop him? Soifan questioned while being baffled. None of his movements were particularly fast. In fact, he simply moved a little faster than normal people. Despite this, her soldier was not even able to retaliate. Gojo smiled at this question and raised his eye cover, showing 1 set of beautiful blue eyes shining like jewels. It's easy if you can see. You dash. Gnashing her teeth at this remark, she waved her hand, signaling to 4 others to attack without the intention to harm him. Gojo simply shrugged at this and put the eye cover back down. I wasn't lying though. In his world, all members of the Gojo clan could more or less use Limitless. But only when Limitless and the Rakugan were linked can they bring out the greatest potential. Limitless was, in a crude way of speaking, a kind of time-space manipulation. But the Rakugan didn't fall behind. One of the best abilities was the one which allowed the user to perceive a moment of reality, as if it was over 1 minute in his mind. This was an extremely powerful ability to use during combat, because even a single second could change the outcome. Haha, man, those guys sure are jumpy. In his current world, the world only he could see, all colors slowly faded until all that was left was a monochromatic white and black. Some people might think that it was some weird power, but in fact, they would be wrong to assume so. Oh, this is really good. Laughing, Gojo slowly watched as all the people jumping towards him appeared as if they were slowed down. Those guys were so straightforward that it was hilarious. What's more, his current body was far stronger than his old one. Thanks to this, he was able to use more power than in the past. Well, if I had Limitless, I wouldn't even need to dodge. While leisurely thinking about how he would recover Limitless, he began to act. What happened next was something Soifan could not understand. In the past, she had served as Princess Yoruchi's personal guard and was a witness to how her princess went from just a lord like any other to the fastest person ever, even to the point of obtaining the title of, as the current commander of the Secret Force, a unit specialized in the use of Shuanpa. She was already used to all feats of speed. She could have accepted it if the man moved so fast that he was invisible. But he is so slow. He wasn't particularly faster than the assailants. He didn't use any Kido either. Despite this, not one of them was even able to touch him, much less wound him. It was as if he was able to see the future. Each of his steps would place him in the most ideal place to either avoid or counter the attacks. Sometimes he would even make them hit or disturb each other. Even energy-wise, he didn't display an overwhelming power, but rather, he used just the necessary amount of strength each time. The worst, he was doing all this with his eyes covered by a blindfold. The fight didn't take long and ended as simply as it began. All the members of the squad were still surrounding Gojo. After all, he didn't hit them that heavily, and they had been trained to be able to fight even with crippling wounds. Still, even though they weren't all that wounded, their ego was nearly destroyed. This fight was simply one of the greatest humiliations they had ever suffered from. Omida, who was the vice captain of the 2nd Division, frowned when seeing them act like this and was about to step forward. However, he was stopped from doing so by a movement of Soifan's hands. Captain, shut up. She was looking at Gojo with an unprecedented serious expression. She didn't know how strong he really was, but he was without a doubt at least at the level of a mid or high-class vice captain. I will present myself. I am Soifan, the captain of the 2nd Division and the commander of the Secret Force. What about you? Her tone had completely changed. While Soifan hated frivolous men like Kasuk or this man in front of her, she also put martial prowess above everything. That was why, even though she already knew his name, she still asked it after introducing herself. This was her way of showing respect for someone strong. Gojo was the kind of guy who gave as much respect as he received. He had no reasons to escalate the situation since that captain didn't wish to do so. What's more, he was still in the dark about the situation in this world. Not to mention that antagonizing the army, just a few days after coming here, wasn't particularly smart. My name is Satoru Gojo. I don't have any fancy title though. E/N Sorcerer Supreme. I see, then Gojo. Do you want to enter the Secret Force? An hour later, Soifan was sitting while facing Isshin Shiba, another person she extremely disliked. She couldn't help but sigh inwardly as she wondered why most, if not all the captains in the Godai 13 were so frivolous. For once, Isshin didn't have his usual goofy expression. After all, he could understand how important the situation was. From what Soifan reported, this man called Satoru Gojo wasn't someone to be trifled with. So did he accept? He didn't give a clear answer. I guess he wishes to gather more information by going through the academy. Even though Soifan was more or less refused, she didn't particularly mind and in fact, even respected the man even more. Being strong was one thing, but plunging headstrong in a situation without enough information was stupid. Isshin chuckled. It was rare for Soifan to have such a good opinion about a man. Well, in a way our mission can be said to be a success. We have gauged his skills at the very least. As for his intentions, I guess we will have to wait for his school life to observe him more. Isshin decided to stop the mission here. After all, if the man could so easily find a secret squad observing him, no one could spy on him. Well, it's time to give feedback to the old man. Saying so, a black butterfly with purple wings flew before landing on his hand. He spoke quietly to it before sending it away. Those butterflies were called Jigakucho, or Hell Butterfly, and had many purposes such as being communication tools. Godai 13, 5th Division. In the center of the Seriidii stood proudly the Godai 13. In one of the main buildings, with the number 5 inscribed on it, a young man with silver-white hair and an unsettling smile listened to the report from the Hell Butterfly. In front of him, a seemingly gentle-looking brown-haired man, wearing a pair of glasses and a white coat over his Shinigami uniform, was doing the same. After a while, once the butterfly vanished, the brown-haired man released a sigh and asked, "So, Jin, what do you think?" Jin Ikamaru, the vice-captain of the 5th Division and the greatest genius in the past 100 years, said, "Captain Aizen, I do not think this is particularly important." Jin said so without breaking his usual smile while he faced his captain, Sosuke Aizen. "This is indeed so, but I must admit that this man caught my attention." Satoru Gojo, was it? Adjusting his glasses, Aizen let out a cold smile as he murmured Gojo's name. Things seemed to become interesting. Godai 13, 11th Division. In the Godai 13, some divisions had different specialties like the 2nd, 4th, and 12th, while some other divisions were simply geared toward fighting. Out of all the divisions, the 11th was known as the overall strongest, not only because of the battle-hungry members that composed it, but more than anything because of its captain, Zaraki Kenpachi, the 11th Kenpachi, a man who was infamous for his strength and his battle thirst. He was also the sole captain to have reached his rank without even passing through the academy, since he killed the 10th Kenpachi, Kaganjo Kenpachi, under the witness of more than 200 Shinigami. Currently, said captain, a very tall man with spiked hair and a long scar on the side of his face was laying down on the grass under the sun as he listened to the report. Once it was finished, a fierce grin split his face as his eyes shone with hunger. Next to him, a very young pink-haired girl was crouching down and observing a group of ants. Without having to turn around, she asked, "Ken-chan, do you want to have fun?" She was Yuichiro Kusajishi, the vice-captain of the 11th Division, and the only one in the world who could call Zaraki like this. After all, she was more or less his adopted daughter. Haha, it seems like an interesting guy will come soon. I hope he will be entertaining. On the side, Yuichiro gave a simple smile. As long as her Ken-chan was happy, nothing else mattered in the world. She sincerely hoped that this man was strong enough to make Zaraki even more happy. Rukongai 1st District West. The 5th and 11th Divisions weren't the only division to receive this piece of news. The report was sent to absolutely all divisions. Each of the captains reacted in different ways. Some were disinterested, some others were curious, and some were wary. But no matter what, one thing was clear. Before even setting foot on the Seriidii, Satoru Gojo was already making waves. Meanwhile, the man of the hour, Satoru Gojo, was smiling blissfully as he ate a delicious cake. His expression, seemingly melting in bliss. Rukongai West Gate today, as the sun stood high in the sky, a sea of people wearing rags or simple clothes walked en masse towards the west gate of the Seriidii, a zone they would generally avoid. The reason for this was simple. The test for entering the second session in the academy was about to begin. For most of the souls belonging to the Rukongai, This was the opportunity for them to get rid of the shackles of poverty and obtain a better life. Even though the success rate was incredibly low, they didn't care. They just needed enough power to enter the school. After all, even grunt soldier Shinigami basically lived like a king compared to the life in the Rukongai. In this sea of people, Gojo, who was observing the scenery with Toshiro, could only frown at the disparity. At first glance, the Suriitii and the Rukongai were simply separated by a river. One side reeked of poverty, while another side reeked of opulence. Despite this, the seemingly simple line was nothing more than an illusion. After all, Gojo could see the spherical barrier that was seemingly surrounding the Suriitii. He didn't know exactly how powerful it was, nor what effect it had, but it was clear that it was no game. Gojo adjusted the bandage over his eyes. He had searched for glasses, but the glasses he wore when he was alive were specially made to block absolutely all light. It wasn't something people in the Rukongai could create, since they didn't have a face mask either. This was the only way to allow his mind to rest a little more. The Rakugan was without a doubt a cheat-like power, but the number of information it constantly sent was pretty overwhelming. After all, even now, despite binding his eyes, he could still technically see. E/N. Wouldn't it be better if he just overloaded his senses every now and then to get used to them? As such, he generally needed to block his sight one way or another. So, Toshiro, are you sure you want to do this? Since he was a little bored with the wait, he decided to make a light discussion. Since Momo went back to the academy, the two of them passed most of the time together, and he had to admit that the boy quite grew on him. Though he had to admit the fact that the boy was super talented and was learning everything pretty easily helped a bit. Indeed, you already told me that I had a hidden talent. I don't want to stay useless. Gojo gave a little grin. You don't want Momo to go too far ahead, you mean? It may have been just a few days, but it was easy to see how close Momo and Toshiro were. Their relationship had nothing romantic, but their friendship was extremely pure. Just as he was about to tease Toshiro even more, a loud rumble brought him out of his thoughts. The gate was slowly opening, and what stood behind the gate was a giant. Gojo raised the corner of the bandages covering his eyes, and to better observe the man towering above all of them, and gave a low whistle. The man raising the gate was a muscular man who easily stood over 9 meters, and was very close to 10. What surprised him was how happy the souls seemed to see him, with some of them even waving at him. You guys know him? Indeed, it's Jidambo, the guardian of the West Gate, since more than 300 years ago. He is a friend, and everyone in the Rukongai likes him. This is interesting. Those of you want to pass the entrance to the academy. The first test is simple. The gatekeeper will release his Ryatsu. Those of you who can go through the gate despite this can enter. Of course, do not worry. He will not go all out. Just enough to lower the number of people who do not possess the minimum requirements to even try the test. The one who was speaking was a bearded middle-aged man wearing a black kimono and a book in his hand. You have until this afternoon to reach me, then register your name. I hereby announce the start of the test. I wish you the best of luck. In the Soul Society, battles between Shinigami could sometimes end in a flash. When the difference in power between the two was too great, it wasn't just a question of stronger and weaker anymore, but the difference between prey and predator. The Ryatsu, or spiritual pressure, was without a doubt one of the most versatile weapons a Shinigami had. Firstly, no two Ryatsu were the same. Not even twins had the same Ryatsu. Secondly, someone with a powerful Ryatsu could completely crush someone with a weaker one without even having to use their weapons. If the difference was too high, the one with the weaker Ryatsu could collapse, faint, or even die depending on how much power was used. Jidambo Ikanzaka was a rather powerful Shinigami who worked as the gatekeeper of the West Gate for more than 300 years. Even though he was lacking in skill, in terms of pure power, aside from some freak, such as the members of the 11th Division, he wouldn't lose to any 4th or 3rd seat. For such a man, if he went all out using his Ryatsu, not even one of those souls would be able to pass through this test. Everyone knew this. Thankfully, not only Jidambo was a kind fellow, but the goal of the test wasn't to make everyone fail. After a few hours, out of the 10,000 people who had wished to enter the academy, only a pitiful 1,000 passed. Even then, the instructor knew that Jidambo had lowered the pressure to allow some more to pass, but he didn't fault him. After all, he had also been from Rukongai. As such, while outright cheating was impossible, he didn't mind closing one eye before this kind of behavior. After verifying the time, he clapped and regrettably announced the end of the preliminaries. Thankfully, there were no limits to the number of times one could retake. Even the little Hisagi took the test twice before succeeding. Now, though he is renowned as one of the best sixth-year students, for souls such as them, what they lacked the least was time. Now then, most of you guys can already more or less be considered as students of the academy. But the reality is that not all students are equal. This is where the second test comes in. The instructor began to speak as a few Shinigami, wearing cloaks that hid all their features, appeared one after another. Those sirs are the members of the Kido Corps. What they are holding are measure devices that will give an accurate reading of your Ryuryoku. You just have to touch the crystal ball and pour your Ryuryoku in it. Of course, this wasn't all. This test hides a little trap. Having a certain level of energy was necessary, but it was also necessary to have some control over it. Those who weren't able to pour their energy in the ball wouldn't be measured, and such not considered as students. This test was made especially for students who had great skills but lacked power. After all, not all Shinigamis were frontline fighters. In the past, the test was even more strident, since it also had a physical part. But after the war against Quincy about 150 years ago, the number of Shinigamis had severely dwindled, and entering the academy became way easier. Fail. Fail. Fail, Class 2. Fail. As I thought, even though the requirements were lowered, the number of fails is still quite high. I don't even think there will be Class 1. CL Class 1. The instructor was surprised at this and turned toward the stand where the one who was assigned to Class 1 was. Oh, Toshiro passed. I am happy. Raising his head, he asked, Jidambo, you know him? Yes. Toshiro is a good boy. Toshiro is my friend. Heh, interesting. The instructor noted down this boy in his mind. Generally, Class 1 was filled with members of the aristocracy. Very few souls from the Rakongai could enter it, and all those that did were, without a doubt, genius. His silver hair makes me think of Jin Ikamaru. That lad was really something else. He didn't even have time to think about how that scary bastard breezed through a 6 years curriculum in just 1 year when he was once again stunned. Class 1. Again. He nearly shouted, and was even more surprised when he saw that this time it was a handsome silver-haired man wearing bandages over his eyes. His first thought was, is he blind? His second thought as he passed through his hand through his hair was, does having silver hair help in becoming a genius? He seriously wondered if he was born with the wrong hair color. When the test ended, only about 100 students passed, and out of those hundreds, only 6, if you count Gojo and Toshiro, were admitted to Class 1. Despite such a result, the instructor seemed rather happy, and Gojo, with his experience, could understand why. For normal humans, the higher the number the better. No matter how skilled one was, sending a wave of mobs would always do the trick. But in the supernatural world, this rule didn't really apply. The larger the difference in power, the higher the number of cannon fodder needed to match would increase. That's why, for supernatural warriors, having that one guy that can act as a nuclear bomb is way better than having a bunch of fireflies. I really wonder who is the strongest bastard in this world. He had been the strongest sorcerer when he was alive. No way in hell would he be satisfied with anything else than becoming the strongest in this world as well. Looking at the sun that was setting, the instructor faced all the examinees who passed. Now then, for those who succeeded, you guys have the rest of the day to do everything you want and say your goodbyes to your family and friends. After this, you will officially enter the academy tomorrow and won't be able to go out before the holidays in a few months. Understood? Yes. Well then, now I can introduce myself. My name is Kigo Ayama. I am the teacher of the first years of Class 2. All I want to say is, congratulations and welcome to the Shino Academy. All the Shinigamis present clapped, making the souls who succeeded tear up with emotion. Even Toshiro had a few tears at the corner of his eyes. The only one who felt bored was Gojo. He wanted to hurry up and enter the academy to learn the theory behind Kido, so that he could recreate Limitless. Even though he was still strong with just the Rakugan, walking without Limitless activated made him feel a little restless, as if he was walking around naked. This wasn't a feeling he appreciated. Now, before you go, each of you will register your name and family name if you have one. You will also get your measurements taken, and you must indicate your dominant arm. Excitement bubbled around. all their eyes focused on the waist of the instructor, where a sword in its sheath could be seen. Even without being told, they all understood why they had to indicate their dominant arms. Soon, they would have their own Zanpakuto. Only by doing so could they really be seen as Shinigami. This made Gojo scratch his chin while in his thoughts. He really wondered what kind of Zanpakuto he would get. From what Momo told him, what the student got was more like the embryo of a Zanpakuto, also known as a Sachi, or sword without name. Once an Asachi and a Shinigami got attuned, those with enough talent could allow their sword to give birth to a soul and awaken a name. Only by knowing this name could an Asachi be officially called a Zanpakuto. Furthermore, all Zanpakutos were unique since they were born from the souls of their wielders. Of course, from what she told him, just getting the name wasn't enough. But she wasn't clear about everything, so she hadn't delved much into her explanation. Well, it's good enough as long as I don't get some useless skill. Aside from some curiosity, he wasn't particularly thrilled about owning a Zanpakuto either. The most important thing for him, as of now, was to reach a sufficient level in Kido. If he was able to master Limitless once again, as long as he didn't meet some weird bastard able to mess with time and space or something of the like, he should be invincible. I should also master sealing techniques. If back then he didn't get stupidly sealed, things would have without a doubt been different. It was with such bitter thoughts filling his mind that he registered. Gojo, are you going to come with me? Ha ha ha. Nah, not now. You and your grandmother must have many things to say to each other. Go spend some time with her. They went after they finished with everything they had to do, and Toshiro waved goodbye to Jidanbo. They were walking in the Rukongai when Toshiro proposed that they go home together. Of course, Gojo refused. He could give his goodbyes later, but at the end of the day, he was just a stranger. As long as he was there, Toshiro wouldn't really be able to express himself. What's more, it was a little his fault that Toshiro decided to join the academy. As such, he felt a little awkward facing the kind old woman. Are you sure? Toshiro asked with some worries. For these few days, he had come to see Gojo as a friend, if not a sort of big brother. E/N. Silver hair gang. In the Rukongai, conventional families did not exist. After all, the vast majority of them did not have the amount of energy necessary to feel hunger, much less giving birth like the souls in the Seriidii. What's more, the chance of finding your family members from when you were alive was incredibly low as long as you didn't die together at the same time, moment and place. Even then, the chances were still low. As such, all families in the Rukongai were more of adopted families than anything else. The same went for Toshiro, Momo, and their grandmother. The three of them had been living as a family for close to 100 years, even though they weren't related when they were alive. In this world, they were his most precious family. Still, he understood that for Gojo, who was still a new soul, he wasn't used to the way the souls in the Rukongai lived. He was feeling a little downcast when he suddenly felt his hair being ruffled. Gojo. Crouching down in front of him, Gojo said, "Man, watching you look down like this makes me feel like I am doing something bad. Come on, let's go home. I will prepare something to show my appreciation to the old hag." "Ah, yes. I am sure Grandma will be happy." The rest of the night went as well as possible. The grandmother asked him to take care of Toshiro and Momo in the academy and wished them well. He could feel how good-hearted this woman was. Gojo had always lacked family warmth, even during his life. After all, even though all the members of the Gojo clan could use Limitless, without the Rakugan, Limitless was just a slightly more powerful curse technique that was basically impossible to use. Because of that, since the moment of his birth, he had been basically worshipped as a god by all the people in his clan, and was already the unofficial leader of the Gojo clan by the time he was in high school. That's why he had to admit that the few days he spent under this home with this gentle old woman and his two slightly troublesome siblings had been incredibly blissful. Looking at the full moon hanging high in the sky with a cup of cheap sake in his hand, Gojo gulped it all down in one go. To a new beginning. He then began to cough heavily. Damn, what the hell do they make this thing with? My badass moment was totally ruined. Cursing, he took out a dango from the plate on his side. Yeah, this is the stuff. Human world. Oh. A terrifying roar resonated in the sky. Under the light of the moon, a large white monster with a hole at the center of its chest and a mask covering its face was happily munching on a bag of flesh and blood. E/N. The author intentionally put bag of flesh. Makes me think that the Hollow is touring France with a bag of flesh, eating a leg, smoking a finger. Crunch, crunch, the disgusting sound of bones slowly being crushed and flesh being bitten apart could be heard. Next to it, watching this scene with terror while his whole body shivered, was a Shinigami. He knew that he wouldn't get out of this alive. He knew that soon, he would end up like his friend, in the maw of the monsters they swore to destroy.